This is The Trail from Hope, Chapter 3. It was late summer now and time to start to prepare for winter. That morning, Nat was making coffee. From what her father had told her, coffee was actually extinct. People now used chicory. It was the only coffee that she had known, but her father would often comment how he missed coffee with caffeine. Her dad now sat at the table looking at the old and tattered farmer's almanac that had been in the house when they had discovered it. He was trying to remember which day it was exactly so he could try and gauge when the first snow would come. You know that thing is never right, especially since the weather patterns changed after it was printed, Nat said as she brought the coffee pot and 2 mugs over to the table and sat down. I know, he answered back. Hey, what day is it anyway? Tuesday, September 8th, Nat answered. Her dad flipped through the pages again until he found it. Well, now it looks like the first snow is supposed to be October 20th. For as long as she could remember, the weather has never been that predictable. Sometimes it seemed like all 4 seasons could happen in one day. Now, the seasons were more or less the same as before, but with a lot more overlap of each other. Except in the dead of winter. It was always cold and dead for about 5 minutes every year. Nat blew on the coffee and laughed a little. Well, that's funny, since we had 2 first traces of snow in August. John laughed and put the book down and picked up the mug. So, he said as he picked up the pot and filled his mug, we have plenty of potatoes and apples and other assorted vegetables to last us 2 winters in the cellar. We also have 4 deer, 12 rabbit, a handful of trout, and 20 squirrels either smoked or salted. That sounds about right, Nat said as she sipped her coffee. Do you think that we need to go hunting again? We still have about 10 deer steaks in the icebox and biscuits from Miss Woods that we can eat on for the next week. Then I figured we could go get a deer just every couple of weeks and be fine. Then once the snow come, we can start on the saved food. John shook his head as he looked out the window. The front yard held about 3 goats and 7 chickens. The grass was low, but they had cut plenty of grass to keep the goats going all winter and had more than enough corn for the chickens. Over on the side of the yard, the empty corn stalks were still standing, and some of the tomato plants and jalapeno plants were still producing a little. All the potatoes had just been dug up and stored. As usual, John felt good about their stores of food. They would not want this winter, and that was always a good thing. Even if it turned out to be a long winter, they could make it through it. You know, Miss Woods asked about you again, Nat said. At the mention of the name, John turned to his daughter, but she was avoiding eye contact by looking out the window. But he could see the sly smile on her face. You were up on the trail when she came by this morning and dropped off the biscuits, she said as she took another slow sip of her coffee. Then, blowing on her coffee, she slowly turned to look at her dad with a smile on her face. She wanted to know when you would be back in town and if maybe you could stop by her place to... Nat paused and tried to stifle a laugh before continuing. To move some furniture for her. John turned his whole body towards Nat now and put his empty hand on his hip. A somewhat annoyed but not angry look on his face. Is that what you older people call it? Nat asked. Moving furniture? Then, unable to hold it in any longer, she burst into laughter. She tried in vain to keep from spilling her cup, but it was no use. She enjoyed torturing her dad about Miss Woods. The woman had been pinning for him ever since she laid eyes on him some 10 years ago. You need to stop leading that woman on at my expense, John said as he wagged his finger at her. Nat looked and forced a surprised face as she brought her hand to her chest like she was astonished at the accusation. What do you mean? I simply told her you were doing well and would be more than happy to help her. Yet I never said such a thing, he said while taking another sip of his coffee. The two have played this game for a long time now, but Nat never tired of it. Every month when they went to town, Miss Woods would find John and hang around their table for far too long. When Nat was younger, she always wondered why the woman had always taken so long to choose a cut of meat. After all, what they had on the table is what they had. It's not like they could go in the back and grab a different cut. The back was just a little red wagon that was parked under the table. It wasn't until she was older that Nat realized that Miss Woods had a crush on her dad and had from the first time he come to town. In Hope, there was a small middle-aged population. There were maybe about 25 people in their 30s and 40s. Almost all the folks in town had been living there when the end happened. When the end happened, a lot of Hope's residents were retirees who lived there because the cost of living had been so cheap. A few middle-aged residents had been the adult children of those that lived there. They ran things like the bank, grocery store, and lawyer's office once their parents retired. Some would move back when things were getting worse. Most had moved back to make sure their parents were okay, or they had nowhere else to go that was safe. That was one thing about Hope. It was a small town in the middle of nowhere that some thought would be safe after the end. Most of the young people in town were teenagers, as having children in the years after the end was seen as a drain on the resources of the town. Nick was about 13, and there were only about 2 or 3 kids younger than him. There was a significant amount of older teenagers in town, if you could call their numbers significant. There were about 20 in their late teens or early 20s, and they ran around the town like a pack of wild animals. At least that's how Nat saw them. People her age were always going out hunting, but not hunting. Instead, they would usually go out into the woods and drink hooch and shoot guns, which Nat always saw as dangerous and a waste of time. That time could be better spent hunting, tending to the garden, pulling weeds, doing chores, or getting ready for winter. They went to school a couple days a week, but only because they were forced. Miss Woods was her teacher. She was the only teacher. She had moved back after college to teach elementary. Now she was the only teacher and teaching everyone. It must have been hard on her, but she was always happy come market days. "She's not going to give up, Dad," Nat said, now serious as she sat down in her chair. "Everyone in town wants you two to get together." "Oh, so everyone in town knows about this?" John asked. Nat threw her hands in the air comically and let them fall back in her lap. "Everyone knows what's going on, Dad, and everyone is wondering when the hell you will sack up and do something." John looked at her with a stern face and then busted out laughing. "Sack up?" he asked in between fits of laughter. Nat wasn't sure what he was laughing about, though she also didn't know what sack up meant. She had just heard it a couple times when she heard people talking about the two of them. Her dad continued to laugh, and now it was coming to a point where he was starting to fake it. Nat crossed her arms and glared at him. She waited until he put on a bit of a show and finally calmed down, which ended when he wiped away tears from laughing. "Oh, daughter, thank you for that. I always enjoy starting a day with a laugh." Nat continued to sit there and stare at her dad until he finished his coffee and stood up from the table. He looked at her and bent over and kissed her head. "I love you, Nat. I'm just not ready to be in a relationship." Nat was ready to argue, but John put his hand up. "This conversation's over, and I would like to move on to talking about our plans for today at least." At this, Nat relented and unfolded her arms. Anytime her dad said the conversation was over, it just was. Any one of them could say it to the other, and the conversation would just end. It was a way to keep from arguments. Now, of course, important discussions would continue in the future, but insignificant ones could be ended to get to more important business. She went back to drinking her coffee as her dad stood there for a second. "Okay, I'm gonna go get the eggs from the coop, check on the goats, put their shit into a pile, and check the fences," John said as he counted the tasks on his fingers. "Wait, that's usually Nick's job," Nat said. "Why are you doing his chores?" "Same reason I let him sleep in today," John answered. Then he walked up close to Nat and leaned in and whispered, "It's his birthday." And with that, he was out the door. Nat felt terrible. She'd forgotten it was Nick's birthday. She started to feel bad when she remembered she had gotten his present about a month ago. As she was finishing her coffee, she had a realization. Why did Dad ask me the date if he didn't know it? Yet he knew it was Nick's birthday. She shrugged her shoulders and figured it was just another little test her dad gave. She finished her coffee and washed it out in the sink. Putting on her coat, Nat went out to do her chores. She put on her boots and went out the back door and up the trail to the pasture, as they called it. She walked across their backyard to the tree line and up a trail that took her about 8 minutes to climb until she reached the fork in the trail. The right fork would take her to the clearing that they called the first clearing. It held their solar panels. Cleaning off the solar panels and ensuring they were in working order was an important task. They lived in the mountains but still got most of their power from solar panels. Her dad had set them up years ago, and they were still working at almost full capacity. Nat walked down the trail to the fork. She looked up the left fork and wanted to ensure that everything was fine up that way, but she knew it was. So she continued back down towards the house. When she walked into the kitchen through the back door, her dad was coming through the front door with a basket of eggs. "Hey, Nat, I want to go by the Johnsons before we head up into the hills. I want to make sure they have everything they need and all." Nat shook her head. "So you want to get another deer today?" Nat asked. "Yeah," John answered. But Mrs. Johnson also promised the pie if I brought some deer jerky, so I figured we would go there for pie.